1 year ago, we were all busy making policy recommendations for the new U.S. administration, suggestions of our own, suggestions from leading figures across our global network. We heard a lot of prognosticating about an American retreat from the global stage, about China setting new rules of the road, about the dangers of withdrawing from global deals and accords. And now, 1 year later, we don't need the hypotheticals or the soothsaying. There's a record that we can examine. So I'm honored to introduce our two experts who will speak about what they've seen over the last year. We have Wendy Cutler, Vice President of ASPE and a former acting Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, and Daniel Russel, our diplomat in residence here at ASPE and a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Before we start the program, for those of you here in the room, please do silence your cell phones. And for anybody watching the live webcast, feel free to ask questions via Twitter using hashtag AsiaSocietyLive or by emailing moderator@asiasociety.org. Now, let's go ahead and dive in. I'll just ask a couple of questions and then I'll open it up to all of you. So Wendy, Danny, there's a lot one could cover in the next hour. We were talking before the program, and you noted that the U.S. has economically retreated from the Asia-Pacific region, but has remained engaged on the security side. Wendy, can you elaborate on the one or two most consequential economic and trade policy decisions President Trump has acted on, or perhaps not acted on, in the region in the last year?
Well, sure. And first, let me just say it's an honor to be here. Thanks for coming out so early. In Washington, D.C., this is late, but I know in New York, it takes a bit of effort to get up and come to something like this so early. And I'm thrilled to be on the panel with Debra and with Danny, my two colleagues at ASPE, and also with our trustees, Denise Saul and Frank Brown. Thanks for joining us. So I have to admit, I was a TPP negotiator, and so just keep that in mind as I respond. But from my perspective, probably one of the most unfortunate things that the Trump administration did very early on in their tenure, and that was on day 3 of the administration, was to withdraw the United States from the TPP agreement. And I think that that's something, an action that people will look back on as a very serious mistake with time. And in fact, and we can get to this later, a year later from that announcement, the other TPP 11 countries now have come together under Japan's leadership to put that deal into effect without the United States. And so what this suggests to me, it's not just the U.S. not getting the benefits from TPP, but we also have to keep in mind that other countries now are filling the vacuum as the U.S. has exited and kind of stepped back from economic leadership in the region. With respect to TPP 11, Japan took the mantle here and really worked hard with Australia and New Zealand to bring the other countries on board. But it's no secret that China also is trying to fill the vacuum, and that was very evident about a year ago when Xi Jinping went to Davos and made a speech which basically said that China now will be the leader of inclusive globalization. It was the free trade country, and it was, an anti-protectionist. So for me, that is probably one of the most serious mistakes of this administration. I do find it very interesting that when the president was in Davos now about 2 weeks ago, there was an opening on TPP. And this was the first time that I've heard him or anyone in his administration say anything positive about TPP. And it seems that there were a lot of caveats, but the president did seem to suggest that if significant changes could be made, then the U.S. might be open to TPP. We can talk about that later, but I found that very interesting. In terms of what didn't happen, and here I'm relieved, if you remember President Trump on the campaign trail, he talked a lot about trade, and he talked a lot about serious actions he was going to take when he came into office. And that included imposing a 45% tariff across the board on all Chinese imports. It included imposing a 35% tariff across the board on all imports from Mexico. And it also included calling China a currency manipulator. In my view, if those actions had been taken, we would have soon been into a trade war. And that did not happen. And so from my perspective, that's good news.
Thanks so much, Wendy. And Danny, same question to you, but focused more on the security and strategic side.
Well, look, the decision that Wendy was describing to pull out of TPP has and continues to have strategic consequences and even security consequences, as did the backing away of the Paris Agreement, as did and does the decision to significantly cut the foreign affairs budget. But I don't think that in the security and strategic realm, the issue is so much big decisions. I mean, there is, on the one hand, a considerable amount of continuity between the Trump administration and the Obama and the Bush administration on a number of issues, the heavy priority on North Korea and the strategy of combining sanctions with an opening to dialogue, the effort to engineer an early off-site with Xi Jinping so the leaders could get to know each other and so on, attending APEC, attending the East Asia Summit and so on. But on the other hand, what I hear from foreign counterparts is really an expression of uncertainty, even confusion about kind of where is the U.S. going and what is the administration trying to accomplish and to communicate on the security and the strategic front. You know, is Japan, South Korea, are they our friends and allies, or are they free riders? Is China helping on North Korea, or is it badly delinquent? Is there this bromance with Xi Jinping, or is China an adversary, even an enemy? Is Kim Jong-un a smart cookie, or is he, short, fat, little rocket man who is going to experience fire and fury? And even on questions like what is the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy? Where's the content? What does that mean? Or does the United States care, as it has traditionally, about human rights? And is that human rights only in North Korea, or is it also in the Philippines or elsewhere? So I think there is an issue of uncertainty more than there is an issue of affirmative decisions that have created ripples.
Thanks for that. So some of you may know, we released about 15 months ago a briefing book for the Trump administration that put forward advice and thoughts of experts and practitioners on, what the Trump administration could do in the Asia Pacific. And one base level thought that they had was that the first thing he could deliver to Asian partners was to really just show up, to listen and to engage. He actually made quite a long trip to the region last year. Wendy, was his trip enough to deliver what allies and partners expect of America?
Well, it's interesting I reread that report last night, and what it is, it's a compilation of essays from different thought leaders around Asia, and it was basically 2 or 3 page memos to to the president of what they wanted a year ago, what they expected, what would be helpful. And 2 of the themes were they wanted the U.S. engaged in Asia, and the other one was it's very important for the president to visit Asia, to be engaged, to have his cabinet in Asia, and what Debra said, to kind of show up. And having worked for different administrations for many years, the showing up was always very important. And one thing I always remember was that the ASEAN countries would meet in late August, and trying to convince my boss, the U.S. Trade Representative, a number of them, that they needed to go to this meeting, that it was key, it was very difficult to get them to go. I think during the Obama administration, because there was such a laser focus on the importance of Asia, we saw more cabinet officials and more presidential trips than in previous administrations. And I think that the fact that President Trump undertook a 12-day trip to this region in November was extremely important. A lot of people were worried in the beginning of his administration that he would not attend not only the APEC summit, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, but also the East Asian Summit, which basically was a few days later in the Philippines with the APEC meeting in Vietnam. And not only did he agree to go to both, but he also then used the opportunity to visit Japan, China, and Korea. It was a 12-day trip, and Danny can tell you, and I can tell you, for any president, that's a really long trip. And sometimes those meetings, particularly the APEC meetings and the EAS meetings, can be very boring. People, a lot of times the other leaders will just, read their talking points. And sometimes these meetings get frustrating because you feel like nothing's being accomplished. But all that said, this is so important for Asia and for the Asian leaders to have the U.S. president there. And so the fact that the president did attend these meetings was very important. And I think the fact that he visited the 3 countries of North Asia was extremely important as well.
And Danny, as we talk about the president delivering, there's kind of an elephant in the room on his foreign policy team and in the State Department, and that's that there are a ton of unstaffed positions. Do you feel that he has the right positions staffed in order to deliver on what's needed for our relationships in the Asia Pacific?
Well, I mean, Wendy made the point that, 80% of diplomacy may be showing up, and I fully agree with her that the decision by the president to attend APEC, to attend the East Asia Summit, to start his Asia trip in allied capitals in Tokyo and Seoul was a good decision, and it's good that he went. It is a grueling trip. One of the things that it allowed him to do was to hold bilateral meetings with a whole host of foreign counterparts, which early in an administration is tremendously important. Defense Secretary Mattis, Vice President Pence, Secretary Tillerson also traveled early on to Asia, and they hosted a number of Asian leaders. So that kind of connectivity at senior levels is very important for U.S. foreign policy. That's the showing up part. The no-show part is what you're asking about, Debra, which is big vacancies. Now, there have been, not limited to Washington, D.C. and the foreign affairs agencies, but importantly in our embassies overseas, there have been some important and good appointments. Ambassador Branstad is in Beijing. Ambassador Haggerty is in Tokyo. Ambassador Juster is in Delhi. These are very competent people with real credentials. But at the same time, there are hugely important vacancies in Australia. No ambassador. We're more than a year in. In the Republic of Korea, given the challenge of the DPRK and the tricky politics and diplomacy surrounding not just alliance issues, but North-South relations and the alliance and the Olympics, that's an important and unwelcome vacancy. But also in Singapore, another tremendously important security and political partner. And in ASEAN, we have no ambassador to ASEAN yet. And, of course, the job that I left at the end of March of last year, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific, I wouldn't call it vacant because my wonderful and hand-picked Deputy Susan Thornton has been there acting on an interim basis and has been nominated and hopefully will be confirmed as the next Assistant Secretary. But these create real problems both of messaging and symbols. The fact that they're vacant raises questions in the minds of many foreign diplomats I know and politicians. How serious is the administration? But also very practical problems. The president and the secretary need field commanders who will drive policy. They need people in these important capitals, in our embassies, who are seen as authoritative representatives of the Trump administration. And I think the bottom line, Debra, is that it's not just a matter of personnel, it's a matter of institutions. And there is a real need, I think, for the administration to demonstrate that it is receptive to and values the professional institutions, the experts and their advice.
If I can just add there, and I agree with everything Danny said, from a very practical point of view too, there are a lot of, there's certain issues that are going to go up to the White House, to the cabinet level, to the president, but there's so many other issues that typically the next layer of political appointees would be responsible for and would meet with their foreign counterparts and advance these issues. And what's happening, in my view, is that a lot of the career people who are filling these positions, they need guidance from their cabinet officers, and the cabinet officers just have so much bandwidth. And so I think that, we are experiencing some problems on that front, and I would hope that in the coming months we'll see many of these vacancies filled, because I think that's very important for our Asian colleagues and counterparts to be able to continue their communication with the administration and to really try and advance kind of those second-tier issues that perhaps are not getting enough attention but are nevertheless very important.
So thank you for indulging me in the first couple of questions. I'll now turn it over to any of you. Does anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
Getting to North Korea, a couple of questions. First, in the bilaterals that our president, had with Japan, Korea, China, aside from showing up and listening, any progress on things to do with North Korea in those bilaterals that you've heard back from your colleagues? That's question one. Question two is, what would get China's attention to seriously engage on significant changes in North Korea? What would be the elements of a deal? Withdrawing U.S. troops, no nukes, da-da-da-da. What do you see as being the menu to work from there?
It didn't take long to get to North Korea. Right. Well, that's as it should be. It's a tremendously big issue. Look, the first person to have a conversation with the president-elect about North Korea was former President Obama, who made clear that this is the most urgent security threat that the new president was going to face. The second, I think, was the Prime Minister of Japan when he came to Trump Tower early in the transition. And the bilateral meetings, both the ones that Prime Minister Abe and Chinese President Xi Jinping, and then later in June, President Moon had with our president in the United States, and then the bilateral meetings that President Trump had in November when he was in Asia, all contributed to, number one, his own education about the different direct dimensions of this incredibly difficult problem set, but also contributed significantly to the further tightening of the coordination, collaboration, and the unity, in the first instance, among and between the allies, Washington, Seoul, Tokyo, but also importantly with regard to Beijing and China. The U.S. and China have a tremendous amount of commonality in our goals and concerns when it comes to North Korea, but not 100%. And there are some significant areas where U.S. interests and Chinese interests diverge for a number of reasons, including reasons of geography. China is North Korea's next door neighbor, reasons of history, reasons of ideology, etc. And we would be badly mistaken to overlook those differences. Now, there is clearly a degree to which China can be motivated by what the United States does, threatens to do, or refuses to do. But at the end of the day, the big motivator for China, in my view, is what North Korea does, is what Kim Jong-un does. Xi Jinping has made clear over and over that his priority is essentially a domestic priority in building out what he calls the China dream, making China a prosperous, stable, and influential nation, taking its, as he sees it, rightful place in the international order. And for that purpose, the one thing that he does not want is chaos or war on the border of China in the Korean Peninsula. He's therefore been amenable to stronger and stronger sanctions measures, principally through the UN Security Council process, in direct proportion to the provocations that Kim Jong-un has undertaken that threaten either the stability of the Korean Peninsula or, even worse, that threaten war. So I'm not of the view that there's a big bargain out there where the U.S. agrees to withdraw troops from South Korea, et cetera, a whole set of quid pro quos, even though many strategists in China would like nothing more than to see that happen. The sad fact is that Chinese leaders, like North Korean leaders, aren't prepared to take our word for those kinds of things. They'll believe that when they see it. What they want is for the United States to soften its position, to make concessions, and perhaps to try to bribe Kim Jong-un into a quieter, less provocative frame of mind.
Anybody else with a question? Yes, Miss.
To get back to trade for a minute, Wendy, you said on the third day Trump made a serious mistake on withdrawing from TPP, but since the third day we've had many days and so many serious mistakes that I think those mistakes are meaningless, especially since he changes his mind many times. So my question is there anybody around him that he trusts to enlighten him or that he would listen to about trade agreements in Washington, of the group that he acts as if he might listen to, like those generals? And I don't know what they know about trade.
Well, actually, I think the generals really appreciate trade, and they understand that in order to have an effective security policy in Asia, you need to have an effective and meaningful economic policy. The question you ask is good, because I think on trade, we have seen that there are a lot of different forces in the administration with, the globalists versus the protectionists, et cetera. This is kind of, I think, shaken out with time, and my sense is that the U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer, really has the president's ear on trade. He is someone who's well known in the trade area, knows trade, knows U.S. law, worked in Congress. He's very hard line. He has very different views on trade than past Republican and Democratic administrations that I've worked for. But he seems to have the president's ear. He is now responsible for the NAFTA negotiations, which are, entering a very important phase now, trying to, conclude by March. I don't think that will be possible, but they're really trying to move those negotiations forward and towards conclusion before the Mexican presidential election in July. He has the president's ear on China, and as such, he has initiated what's called a Section 301 investigation on Chinese unfair trade practices on intellectual property, including the practice of so-called forced technology transfer. And We are expecting actions to be announced against China imminently under this 301 investigation. He is responsible for the U.S.-Korea free trade agreement renegotiations as well. And he's responsible for a lot of the enforcement actions that this administration's really putting a premium on. Obviously, there are other people in the administration who are very key as well, including Gary Cohn at the National Economic Council, Wilbur Ross at the Department of Commerce, and others. But what I'm sensing is that particularly on the issues I just mentioned, that there is a real convergence of different views on how to handle these issues going forward. So we'll have to see how they all shake out in the coming weeks and the coming months. But I do think we're going to see more trade actions taken against certain trading partners in the coming weeks. And the announcement that was made just 2 weeks ago on import protection for washing machines and solar panels is just the beginning of a series of announcements that will be coming.
Please, Frank.
Just curious, and we now, after a year, have some indicators. The tax policy started out at a 15% corporate rate and wound up at 21, and we started out with 3 brackets and wound up at 7, and a back of an envelope, and we've still got long tax forms, et cetera. But my point is that relevant to trade? Is that relevant to security in the Korean Peninsula, et cetera? I mean, Trump's saber rattling and his positions, at the end of the day, is he somebody who's just looking to make a deal and whatever deal he can get and declare victory? And is that going to mean minor modification to NAFTA, a few concessions on TPP, or is it, nothing's going to happen for the foreseeable future? If I were betting, I would say the former, but I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. If you think of the NAFTA negotiations, the administration has, in many respects, followed what we did in TPP, and we're asking Canada and Mexico to do what they already agreed to do in TPP. And that's really a high percentage of the current negotiation. But that remaining maybe 20% are what we call these new kind of unconventional proposals that the administration has put on the table, calling for a 5-year termination of this agreement unless all 3 sides decide to continue it. It's calling to weaken the dispute settlement mechanism. It's calling to take away a lot of the government procurement benefits. And it's also calling for more auto production in the United States and asking Canada and Mexico to basically sign off on that. And so all of these proposals and others are very controversial. Canada and Mexico have made it very clear that they're having a hard time seeing how they can move forward on these issues. And so the question is, and we don't know the answer yet, is the administration, how much flexibility do they have on these proposals? Are they willing to work with Canada and Mexico to find that common ground and maybe meet them halfway? Because if they are, my view is there are agreements to be made on these issues. But if the administration is just kind of willing to kind of tweak a little and just keep and continue saying we need this, without this the president is going to withdraw from the agreement, then that's a very different equation. And that's what's playing out now at the negotiating table. And at this last round of NAFTA negotiations, Canada and Mexico really started engaging on these proposals, putting forward their ideas on how to bridge the differences. And so we'll have to see whether the administration now starts moving closer to Canada and Mexico, or just basically says my way or the highway, and if you don't agree, we are going to withdraw from this deal.
If I could add on the strategic and security side, Frank, the tax bill, as an example, is one in which the Congress had a tremendous amount of influence and was really the vehicle for getting it done. That is not, generally speaking, the case on security, where the president has a lot of decision-making latitude. That said, like any president, once elected, he's embarked on a journey of discovery and learning. That's true for every president. It's particularly true for a president who has no previous experience in government, no previous experience in defense, in security, in foreign policy, and so on. So it gets at an important question, which is, who does the president listen to? Now, it was pointed out to me shortly after the inauguration that a president who was famous for not only dismissing the advice of experts and his own staff, but treated the campaign like it was opposite day and did the opposite of what conventional wisdom suggested and succeeded, was unlikely to be a prisoner of the experts once he began to govern. And I think by and large that's true. As Wendy described, some advisors ascend or descend in influence. But when you think about who the peers are for the President of the United States, the fact of the matter is that by and large they are foreign counterparts. And I think we have seen from the visit beginning with Prime Minister Abe of Japan to Mar-a-Lago, then the visit of President Xi, et cetera, that President Trump has learned a lot and often been influenced by what he hears from and what he learns from his peers. Now, my bias is I would much rather have the president take advice from democratically elected leaders in allied countries. But I think that by and large, the interaction with foreign counterparts is having a tempering effect on some of his approaches and some of his positions.
Yes, sir.
Just a following question for Wendy. So as you mentioned, President Trump made a positive comment on TPP and the multilateral trade negotiation in Davos. So do you think Trump administration has changed its trade policy, or he just made a comment?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I find it fascinating, as I said, because it is an opening. And for a president who called that agreement the rape of the country and the worst deal ever, and the negotiators who negotiated it, the most incompetent people on the earth, I found this, I found it potentially encouraging. But also, I just caution everyone, including my counterparts from the other TPP countries, that, this will take time. It was kind of a vague statement. It had a lot of caveats. It said it would need to be a substantially better deal. What does that mean? And there were other kind of caveats put around this. But once again, it is an opening. I firmly believe the TPP 11 countries should go ahead on schedule, sign the deal in early March. That's what they're talking about doing in Chile. Put the agreement into effect, maybe get it into force as early as January 1, 2019. And then over time, I think the U.S. can, begin the conversations with the individual TPP countries and see if there is a path forward, if indeed that's what this administration wants to do. The administration has also been very focused on making clear that its preference is on concluding bilateral trade agreements and not group deals like TPP. But what they've encountered is that there's no one standing in line to do these bilateral deals with the United States, that the other countries see more benefits from an agreement that has more countries because it's more impactful, and that's the way business is done. It's no longer, except for some few products, you no longer just export a product from country A to country B. That's where a bilateral deal can help. But if a product moves across a number of countries, you want a deal that includes all of those countries, and you have some kind of value chain or supply chain which recognizes that. And also, the more countries, that means the more countries agreeing to the same rules. So there are a lot of reasons why countries are moving, particularly in Asia, towards the regional approach, while the U.S. is talking about bilaterals. And I would just, if I can put a plug in for a recent report we did at the Asia Society Policy Institute, these are exactly the issues we looked at. When we didn't, and this is a report that was authored by me and a number of other Asians, former trade officials that I've worked with. And what we concluded, regional deals are better, but we see there is merit for bilateral deals. But the importance is, as you pursue bilateral deals, you want to make sure that they're as consistent as possible with other deals so businesses can actually take advantage and use these deals. I mean, you can have a great bilateral trade deal, but if no one's using it and no one really wants to, do the paperwork to live up to gain the benefits of the agreement, it's really not as useful as it could be.
Gentleman here, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. First, back to North Korea with the, should we call it a denomination of Victor Cha. Is there anything we can read into President Trump's thinking, given that Victor was against the bloody nose strategy and he had publicly said that North Korea would never give up its weapons? And then separate, unrelated question on One Belt, One Road. How successful do you think that will be in terms of trade and development and in terms of diplomacy for China in the region?
Well, two great questions. Thanks very much. We should be very careful about extrapolating from the reports of Victor Cha's nomination being withdrawn and the extent to which that may have been driven by a policy disagreement. We heard certainly from Victor himself in an op-ed in the Washington Post his reservations about the quote-unquote bloody nose strategy, and a very important question, which is, if you didn't think you could deter North Korea from threatening us with nuclear weapons, with the force and might of the U.S. military, what makes you think you can deter North Korea from retaliating in the event of a military attack? What I think you can reasonably draw as a conclusion is that there are multiple views within the administration. I don't know that it gives you an answer about the president's own thinking, but we've heard pretty bellicose sort of march to war types of messages coming out of the National Security Advisor, National Security Council. We've also heard very clear messages from the U.S. military, beginning with the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, reminding all of us that a war on the Korean Peninsula would be devastating and would be very, very painful for the United States and, importantly, for our South Korean allies, even if it spelled the end of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. There are real questions here. Now, I'm not a believer in litigating our defense options in public. I'm also not of the view that there is no military option. There's just no good military option, or no military option that doesn't carry a lot of risk. That said, as the risk from a nuclear-capable North Korea grows, the gap between the risk of doing nothing and the risk of doing something with our military starts to narrow. And that's certainly something that we need to worry about, and I think is a very powerful driver of the need for strong deterrence, strong defense, bolstering our alliances, maintaining unity, and keeping the door open to diplomacy. That's been the traditional policy approach, along with imposition of sanctions, since the mid-Bush administration, certainly through the Obama administration, and I see that carrying forward today. Now, on the One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and Road initiative, it's a bit of a Rorschach test in the sense that what you see in the Belt and Road Initiative depends a lot on who you are and where you sit. Some people see it as an expression of Chinese hegemonic, geostrategic claim to dominance, see it as the creation of a network of military bases that will unite the Eurasian Peninsula under the control of Beijing, sort of bringing back images of the Han Dynasty and the imperial court. Other people see a sensible, in fact enviable, application of a lot of surplus capital and foreign currency towards a large-scale infrastructure and integration project that will move Central Asia and much of Southeast Asia into the 21st century while creating tremendous economic and commercial opportunities, not only for the target countries, the host countries, not only for China, but for others as well. I think that we need to concentrate as the United States on what it is that we think should be achieved and not what it is that we are afraid of. And there is plenty of room to advocate and to work with China and with the neighboring and the target countries of Belt and Road to try to ensure that, as we have tried in other global and regional domains, that Chinese initiative, the Belt and Road, is conducted in a way that's consistent with the best standards that have been developed over the last 5 or 6 decades. That means respect for the environment. It means respect for labor rights. It means respect for local laws and social norms. It means transparency. Those ought to be the targets, and I think that sound U.S. strategy regarding the Belt and Road Initiative ought to be aimed at those. I also think that, to your question about its prospects for success, the more that the United States is able to be supportive because the projects are living up to international standards, the lower the anxiety and the greater the comfort level of China's neighbors in allowing these Belt and Road projects to be conducted.
I'm actually going to go ahead and take a couple of questions at once, and since we're getting close to the end of the program. Sir, in the very back, there's a microphone coming.
Hello?
Yep,
Maybe
we
it
can
does.
hear
Okay. I had 2 questions, if you don't mind. So the first one is, there's an academic out of Australia named Hugh White who wrote a paper, I don't know, a couple months ago. Pretty alarmist paper, essentially posits that America's position in East Asia and the South China Sea, etc., is eroded to an extent that we can no longer even pretend to share security, the security relationships in the region that we have. Very alarmist, obviously. Curious about what your realistic assessment on the ground is about, or I should say in the water is about that. Second question I had for you was on India-U.S. defense and security ties. Again, an area with lots of talk. Curious about your views on substance. Is there actual progress, etc.?
And sir here.
Thanks. I have a question about the trade negotiation, because in the book, The Making of NAFTA, the Professor Cameron suggests during that time, the U.S. representative leverage the Congress like political pressure as an important bargaining chip. I'm wondering, and under the Trump administration, is the U.S. representative leverage the president's special personal characters as the new bargaining chip? Thanks.
I'll take one more here.
Hi, I have a two-part question. So first of all, when you kind of talked about in the beginning about other countries starting to fill the shoes of the U.S., that the U.S. left behind in Asia. So my first question is, do you think France is going to take that place with their latest trip, Macron's latest trip to China and a bunch of trade deals being put in place? And secondly, whoever takes the United States position in Asia, how long after the Trump administration leaves would it take to repair some of the relationships with our major allies in the region, most notably South Korea and Japan? Thank you.
Who wants to take it?
Well, I'll start, and I'll start with Hugh White, who has been declaring Australia's independence from the United States for as long as I've been around. On the South China Sea, I think that there is a case to be made that the administration has applied less focus to this problem set than it warrants, and certainly considerably less than in the Obama administration. It's certainly true that there's no change whatsoever in the U.S. Navy's operation, the Seventh Fleet's operation throughout the South China Sea. What we're not hearing is the explicit repeated affirmation from the Trump administration about what this means, that the United States will continue to sail, fly, and operate in international space as long as that is consistent with international law, and that applies equally in the South China Sea as it does in other international waters. Moreover, that it isn't enough that the United States can send aircraft carriers and can send F-22 fighter jets throughout international water and airspace. After all, who's going to stop them? The goal has to be a set of rules that ensure that the smallest country with the weakest navy can also traverse all international space, all international water, without threat, without fear. And that's why the issue in the South China Sea isn't just about an occasional freedom of navigation operation. It's certainly not about sovereignty over rocks. And the United States not only doesn't have a claim, but doesn't have a position as to whether this rock belongs to that country and that rock belongs to this country. It's not about rocks, it's about rules. And if the region of the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific is going to remain stable and continue to grow, it will need to have respect for the rules, for the norms, for international law by all parties, particularly the powerful parties, and China, of course, is approaching the top of that list. India also is growing economically and strategically. Some countries in the region see India as something of a hedge, of a balancer to China. I think it would be a mistake to impute those motives to either the thinking in Delhi or to the rationale for why a strong U.S.-India relationship is important. India is important and valuable in its own right as a market, as a democracy, as a strategic player, and the Act East policy, and in fact the degree to which India under Prime Minister Modi has engaged in the life of East Asia is a major plus for U.S. interests. And lastly, with respect to repairing relations, it's an unanswerable and unknowable proposition. What I hear again and again from my former counterparts and my friends in much of Asia, throughout Southeast Asia in particular, is the message that the United States has very strong institutions and is tremendously resilient. They say we've seen the pendulum swing wildly in the United States over the past decades, from the Vietnam War and the Iraq War to strong bilateral and multilateral engagement. I think they have their fingers crossed, and perhaps the one category that will be hardest to reconstruct, if it is allowed to unwind, will be the foreign affairs apparatus, the Agency of International Development, the Department of State, and the willingness of the best and the brightest in the United States to decide to make public service and diplomatic service their career.
Wendy, do you want to take the two trade questions?
Yeah, so just with respect to the last point that Danny touched upon, like how quickly could we get this back? My sense is, talking and working on this recent trade report with former colleagues, is that the Asians really, they do want us back. They want us back in Asia. They want us back in these trade agreements. They want us to be engaged. They want us to lead. And so that's positive. On the other hand, my sense is that when we're ready to do that, the region, the world's just going to be a little different. And I think, getting back to TPP 11, I suspect when that negotiation started, the 11 countries, when they first started meeting, they really missed the United States, and they wanted us there, and they were kind of lost. But I believe over time, they developed their own confidence and recognized they could do this without us. And I think we're going to see that confidence being transferred to other areas as well. And so I think the world, that when we're ready to re-engage, it might be a bit different. And so it's just, I don't think it's going to be as automatic as maybe we would hope for. With respect to just the question on NAFTA, I also find this fascinating, the role of Congress. And that is, as a long-term trade negotiator, we always viewed, or trading partners always viewed, the administration as the good people to work with, and Congress kind of the crazies, okay? And now we see our trading partners going to Congress to put pressure on the administration to, not to withdraw from NAFTA, not to blow up Chorus, and to make sure that the proposals on the table will lead to more market opening. We're also seeing like a fascinating, just watching Canada play the NAFTA negotiations. They're all over the country. They're working so closely with governors. And so you have kind of between the governors, Congress, and stakeholders, those are the forces that are being used to kind of try and keep the administration in a good place on NAFTA. But the other thing we're seeing on NAFTA, and here you have Canada and Mexico, where 75 to 80% of their exports come to the United States, they're beginning to feel that, you know what, this isn't good. We are too dependent on the United States. And so diversification of trading partners for them is key right now. And so it's no surprise that Justin Trudeau was in China last month working on, perhaps launching a free trade agreement negotiations with China. They're not there yet, but I suspect they'll find a way to move forward. It's not a coincidence that Mexico's trying to finalize its deal with the European Union. And it's not a surprise that both Canada and Mexico are members of the TPP-11 and will have access to Japan's agriculture and other market once the TPP-11 comes into force. So as we step back, the other countries recognizing the importance of trade and the importance of not relying too much on the U.S. and the U.S. market are trying to diversify their trading partners. Look, we're always going to be a big market. They'll always be interested in our market, but we're probably not going to have the leverage and the kind of the market power that we've had to date. I think things are going to be changing.
So thank you both for your takeaways on the first year of U.S. Asia policy under the Trump administration. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I hope I can indulge in one final question. We've looked at the year that's just passed and heard a lot about what's been happening in the U.S.-Asia relationship. What do you each think is kind of the one big thing we should watch in the year ahead between the U.S. relationship with Asia?
For me, it's going to be the need to watch whether this administration becomes more economically engaged in the Asia Pacific, working with other countries to help set the rules and to help advance trade liberalization.
Danny?
I would say that it will be the question of whether the administration finds a formula for viewing and engaging with China that is not branding China as an adversary or an enemy, but instead is reconciling the different components of our relationship with China. An approach that allows for cooperation, that allows for competition, which is what brings out the best in both of us, but that also allows us to deal directly, effectively, and honestly with our very significant differences and avoid the kind of strategic Cold War rivalry or struggle that brings out the worst in both of us.
I'm happy to hear it's not North Korea. So thank you to our experts for their time today. Thank all of you for joining us. We appreciate you coming in person and online. For those interested, our next installment of this Asia briefing series will be March 7th, and we'll focus on the domestic challenges in Iran. Our guest will be Trita Parsi, the founder and president of the National Iranian American Council. And for more information on that or any other of our upcoming programs, please visit asiasociety.org. Thanks so much.